I never imagined that coming home from cancer treatment would feel like walking into my own funeral. Please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what city you're watching from. The taxi pulled up to what should have been my driveway, but there was a bright red sold sign planted right where my mailbox used to be. My hands started shaking before my mind could even process what I was seeing. The driver looked confused. "You sure this is the right address, sir?" I stared at my $5 million mansion, the house I'd built with my own hands 23 years ago, where Sarah had taken her first steps, where my late wife Margaret had planted roses that still bloomed every spring. A house that shouldn't be sold because I'd never put it on the market. "There must be some mistake," I whispered. But even as I said it, I could see Ethan's silver BMW parked where my old Ford usually sat. My 31-year-old son-in-law was standing on my front porch, like he owned the place, talking animatedly on his phone and gesturing with the kind of confidence that made my stomach turn. I paid the driver with trembling fingers and walked toward my own front door feeling like a stranger. The chemotherapy had left me weak, but the confusion was making me feel ancient. 3 weeks away for cancer treatment, and somehow my entire life had been sold out from under me. Ethan spotted me before I reached the steps. His face lit up with what I can only describe as malicious joy. "Well, well," he called out, ending his phone call with a dramatic flourish. "Look who finally decided to come crawling back." "Ethan, what's going on here? Why is there a sold sign on my property?" He laughed, actually laughed, and stepped down from the porch like he was descending from a throne. "Your property? That's rich, Ryan. This hasn't been your property for exactly 18 days now." My legs felt weak. The cancer treatment had already drained most of my energy, but this was something else entirely. This was the kind of exhaustion that comes from having your world turned completely upside down. "I don't understand. I never authorized any sale. I never even spoke to a realtor." "Oh, but your daughter did." Ethan's smile was sharp as a knife. "Sarah handled everything while you were off playing sick man in that fancy cancer center. She realized it was time for some responsible adult decision-making around here." The words hit me like physical blows. Sarah, my only child, the little girl who used to beg me to read her bedtime stories, who'd graduated summa cum laude from college with my support, who'd walked down the aisle of this very house's garden when she married this man standing in front of me. "Where is Sarah? I need to talk to her." "She's inside packing up the last of the valuable stuff, you know, the things that actually matter." Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "But since you're here, I can give you this personally instead of mailing it." He handed me what looked like a check. When I unfolded it, I saw my name written in Ethan's careful handwriting and an amount that made me blink several times to make sure I was reading correctly. $500. $500? My voice came out as barely a whisper. "That's right, old man, $500. Ethan's voice was getting louder, more theatrical, like he was performing for an invisible audience. "That's the crumb you deserve, enough to survive on the streets for maybe a month if you're careful with it." I looked up from the check to see several neighbors had come out of their houses. Mrs. Peterson from next door was standing on her front lawn with her mouth hanging open. The young couple across the street had stopped loading their car to stare. Everyone was watching this humiliation play out in broad daylight. "Ethan, please, this has to be some kind of mistake. This house is worth $5 million. Even if there was some emergency that required selling it, $500 makes no sense." "Makes perfect sense to me." He crossed his arms and looked me up and down like I was something disgusting he'd found on his shoe. "You think you deserve more? You think you contributed anything meaningful to this family?" My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the check. The chemotherapy had already made me feel fragile, but this was breaking me in ways that had nothing to do with cancer. I built this house. I raised Sarah here. I worked for 35 years to provide for this family. Built this house. Ethan's laugh was cruel and sharp. "Sarah told me all about your little construction hobby, playing with hammers and nails while her mother did the real work of managing this family's finances. You're nothing but a handyman who got lucky marrying above his station." Each word was designed to cut, and they were working. I could feel myself shrinking under his verbal assault, my 67-year-old body already weakened by months of cancer treatment, now being further diminished by my own son-in-law's hatred. "Sarah?" I called toward the house, my voice cracking with desperation. "Sarah, please come out here." "She doesn't want to see you right now," Ethan said smoothly. "She's too embarrassed by what you've become. A sick old man who can't even take care of himself anymore. That's when I heard the front door open. Sarah appeared, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. She was carrying a box that I recognized contained Margaret's jewelry, pieces that had been in my family for generations. "Sarah, sweetheart, what's happening here? Please help me understand." She finally looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes was worse than Ethan's cruelty. It was pity mixed with something that looked uncomfortably like shame. "Dad, you've been sick. The cancer, the treatment. It's been affecting your judgment. Ethan and I talked to doctors, and they said this kind of confusion is normal when someone your age goes through what you've been through." "Confusion? Sarah, I'm not confused. I never agreed to sell this house." Ethan stepped closer to me, close enough that only I could hear his next words. "Here's what's going to happen, old man. You're going to take that check, and you're going to disappear. Because if you try to make trouble for me, I'll make sure everyone knows just how pathetic and desperate you really are." I looked at that check again. $500 for a $5 million house. The mathematics alone should have been enough to prove something was terribly wrong, but standing there in my own driveway, surrounded by neighbors who were watching my humiliation, holding that insulting piece of paper in my trembling hands, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Margaret died 5 years ago. I laughed. It started as a small chuckle, but it grew until I was laughing so hard that tears started running down my cheeks. Both Sarah and Ethan were staring at me like I'd completely lost my mind, which only made me laugh harder, because suddenly I remembered something very important, something I'd never told anyone, not even Sarah, something that was going to make this whole situation very interesting. "What's so funny?" Ethan demanded, his confidence flickering for the first time since I'd arrived. I wiped the tears from my eyes and looked at both of them, my daughter who thought she was protecting me from myself, and my son-in-law who thought he'd just pulled off the perfect crime. "Oh, Ethan," I said, folding the check and putting it in my pocket. "You have no idea what you've just done, do you?" The look of confusion that crossed his face was worth every moment of humiliation I'd just endured. The memory hit me like a lightning bolt as I stood there watching Ethan's confused expression. 7 years ago, when Sarah was going through her divorce from her first husband, she'd made some terrible financial decisions that nearly bankrupted her. Credit card debt, a failed business venture, and a vindictive ex-husband who was trying to claim half of everything she owned, including any future inheritance from me. That's when I'd made a decision that I'd never told anyone about, not even Sarah herself. I'd quietly transferred the deed of the house into a family trust, with myself as the sole trustee and Sarah as the beneficiary. On paper, it looked like I still owned the house, but legally it belonged to the trust. Sarah could inherit it eventually, but she couldn't sell it, mortgage it, or lose it to creditors or divorce settlements. I'd done it to protect her from herself, and from people exactly like the man standing in front of me now. The beautiful irony was that Ethan had just tried to sell a house that Sarah didn't legally own and couldn't legally sell. Every signature on every document was worthless. The sale was completely invalid, but I wasn't going to tell him that. Not yet. "Ryan, you're scaring me," Sarah said, taking a step closer. "Maybe we should call your doctor. The stress of the cancer treatment might be affecting you more than we realized." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw something I'd been too trusting to notice before. She was nervous. Not worried about Dad nervous, but guilty nervous. The kind of nervous that comes from knowing you've done something wrong and hoping you won't get caught. "Sarah, I need you to explain something to me. When exactly did you decide to sell my house?" "It wasn't like that, Dad." She glanced at Ethan, and I caught the look that passed between them, a look that said they'd rehearsed this conversation. "You've been getting more forgetful. Small things at first, but then bigger things. And with the cancer diagnosis." "What kind of bigger things?" Ethan jumped in smoothly. "Tell him about the unpaid bills, honey. Tell him about how you found him wandering around the neighborhood at 3 in the morning, not remembering how he got there." I stared at Sarah. "That never happened." "Dad, I know you don't remember, but it did. That's what's so scary about this disease. It makes you forget things, even important things." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost started to doubt myself. Maybe I was forgetting things. Maybe the cancer treatment had affected my mind more than I realized. Maybe I was the one who was confused, and these two people who claimed to love me were just trying to protect me from myself. Then I remembered the trust documents, sitting safely in my safety deposit box at the bank, and I felt my confidence return. So you decided to sell the house without talking to me about it first. We tried to talk to you, Ethan said, his voice taking on that patient tone people use with children and mental patients. Multiple times, but you kept saying you didn't want to move, that you wanted to stay here until you died. We realized we had to make the hard decision for you. And you found a buyer immediately? The market's hot right now, Sarah said quickly. Ethan knows people in real estate. When we explained the situation, they were very understanding about the need for a quick sale. How quick? 2 weeks, Ethan said proudly. From listing to closing in 14 days, I saved the family thousands in realtor fees by handling it privately. Privately, of course. No real estate agent would have been fooled by the fraudulent paperwork. No legitimate buyer would have agreed to such a ridiculously low purchase price for a $5 million property. This had to be an inside job, which meant Ethan's buyer was either a friend, family member, or business partner. Who bought it? Ethan and Sarah exchanged another look. This one lasted a little too long. An investment company, Sarah said finally. They specialize in buying properties quickly for cash. They plan to flip it. What's the name of the company? Metro Property Solutions, Ethan answered without hesitation, too quickly like he'd been expecting the question. I nodded thoughtfully. And they paid $5 million for it. Well, not exactly $5 million, Sarah said, looking uncomfortable. When you need to sell quickly, you have to accept less than market value. But Dad, even at the reduced price, there was enough to pay off all your medical bills and still have money left over for a nice assisted living facility. How much did they pay? The silence stretched out so long that Mrs. Peterson started walking back toward her house, apparently deciding the show was over. $750,000, Ethan said finally. $750,000 for a house worth $5 million. And out of that, they'd generously given me $500. Where's the rest of the money? Safe, Sarah said quickly, in a trust account that Ethan set up for your care. A trust account that I don't have access to. Dad, that's the whole point. The doctors said that people with your condition shouldn't be managing large amounts of money. It's too easy to make mistakes, to be taken advantage of by scammers. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My own daughter was explaining to me how I needed to be protected from scammers while standing next to the biggest scammer I'd ever met. I'd like to see the paperwork. What paperwork? Ethan's voice sharpened slightly. The sale documents, the trust papers, the bank statements, all of it. Dad, you don't need to worry about those details. That's what family is for, to handle the complicated stuff while you focus on getting better. I looked at Sarah and felt my heart break a little. Either she was actively participating in defrauding me, or she was being manipulated by her husband into believing I was incompetent. Either way, my own daughter was betraying me. Sarah, I want you to look me in the eye and tell me honestly, do you really believe I'm not capable of managing my own affairs? She couldn't do it. She tried, but after about 3 seconds of eye contact, she looked away. It's not about capability, Dad. It's about protecting you from making decisions you might regret later, like the decision to hold onto a house I built with my own hands, like the decision to refuse treatment that could save your life because you're worried about the cost, Ethan interjected. Sarah told me you almost didn't start chemotherapy because you were concerned about depleting your savings. That was true. I had been worried about the cost. Cancer treatment is expensive, even with insurance, and I'd wanted to make sure Sarah would still have something to inherit after I was gone. But I'd never told Sarah that, which meant either she was much more observant than I'd given her credit for, or she'd been going through my personal papers and bank statements. Sarah, have you been monitoring my bank accounts? Someone had to, she said defensively. You weren't paying attention to your finances. Bills were piling up, automatic payments were bouncing. Ethan and I were trying to help. By selling my house without my permission? By making sure you have enough money for proper medical care, Ethan snapped, instead of wasting it on property taxes and maintenance for a house that's way too big for one old man. Old man, there it was again. In Ethan's mind, I wasn't Ryan Miller, successful contractor and businessman. I wasn't Sarah's father or Margaret's widower. I was just an old man, a problem to be managed, an obstacle to be removed. But I was also the legal owner of a trust that he'd just tried to defraud, and the sole trustee with the power to make his life very complicated. You know what, Ethan? You're absolutely right. Both of them blinked in surprise. I'm getting old. My memory isn't what it used to be, And managing a big house like this while dealing with cancer treatment is probably more than I can handle. Sarah's face lit up with relief. Oh, Dad, I'm so glad you understand. We were so worried about how you'd react. I think you two have shown remarkable maturity and foresight in handling this situation. Ethan's chest puffed up with pride. I told Sarah that sometimes families have to make tough decisions together. Absolutely. In fact, I'm so impressed with how you've handled everything that I think we should celebrate. Celebrate? Sarah looked confused. Why don't we all go inside, open a bottle of that wine Margaret saved for special occasions, and you can show me all the paperwork from the sale. I want to see exactly how clever you two have been. Ethan and Sarah exchanged another look, but this time it was pure triumph. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd rolled over and accepted their version of reality. They had no idea that I was about to show them the difference between a checkmate and a check. That sounds wonderful, Dad, Sarah said, linking her arm through mine. I think you're going to be very impressed with how well everything worked out. As we walked toward the front door of the house that legally still belonged to me, I couldn't help but smile. Oh, I was definitely going to be impressed, just not in the way they were expecting. Walking through my own front door felt surreal. Everything looked the same, but somehow different. The family photos were still on the mantel, but they'd been rearranged. Margaret's antique china cabinet was empty. The pieces that had been in her family for 4 generations were nowhere to be seen. Where's your mother's china? I asked Sarah as casually as I could manage. Oh, that old stuff. Ethan waved dismissively. We donated it to charity. Sarah thought it would be better to simplify things for your move. Donated to charity. Margaret's great-grandmother's wedding china, worth at least $15,000, donated to charity, or more likely sold and the money pocketed. That's very thoughtful, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm sure someone will appreciate those pieces. Sarah looked uncomfortable. Dad, I know how much Mum's things meant to you, but holding on to so much stuff wasn't practical anymore. I nodded and walked into the kitchen, where I'd shared thousands of meals with Margaret and Sarah over the years. Even here, things were missing. The silver coffee service that had been a wedding gift was gone. The crystal glasses we'd used for special occasions had disappeared. You've really been thorough, I observed. Ethan says that starting fresh is important when you're dealing with major life changes, Sarah said, following me around like she was afraid I might have some kind of breakdown. All that old stuff was just going to remind you of sad memories. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway carrying a bottle of wine and looking very pleased with himself. I thought we should use the good stuff for this celebration, he said, showing me the label. It was a 1978 Bordeaux that Margaret and I had been saving for Sarah's wedding. We'd forgotten to open it during the ceremony, and she'd insisted we keep it for an even more special occasion. Looking at the bottle in Ethan's hands, I realized this was probably exactly the kind of special occasion she'd had in mind. Perfect choice, I said. Let me get the corkscrew. Already got it, Ethan said, producing the antique silver corkscrew that had belonged to my grandfather. Another family heirloom that would probably disappear the moment I left the house. As he opened the wine, I walked over to the kitchen table where several manila folders were stacked neatly. Are these the sale documents? Everything's there, Sarah said proudly. Ethan was very organized about keeping track of all the paperwork. I opened the first folder and immediately saw what I was looking for. The deed transfer documents showed that Sarah Miller Henderson was selling the property at 247 Oak Street to Metro Property Solutions for the sum of $750,000. But according to my trust documents, Sarah Miller Henderson didn't own 247 Oak Street. The Miller Family Trust did, and I was the sole trustee with exclusive authority over all trust assets. This is very impressive work, I said, flipping through the pages. Very official looking. Ethan has a friend who's a lawyer, Sarah explained. He made sure everything was done properly. A friend who's a lawyer, not a real lawyer then, just someone who could produce convincing-looking documents. I kept reading, noting the forged signatures and fabricated notary stamps. Whoever had prepared these papers had done a decent job, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that the person listed on the property tax records was the actual legal owner. Sarah, I'm curious about something. When you signed these papers, did anyone explain to you what a quitclaim deed is? She looked blank. I just signed where they told me to sign. Of course she did, because Ethan had probably told her it was just a formality, just paperwork to protect me from myself. She had no idea she'd been signing documents claiming ownership of property she'd never legally owned. And this Metro Property Solutions company, I continued. Did you meet with them personally? Ethan handled all of that, Sarah said quickly. You know how I am with business stuff. I let him take care of the details. I turned to Ethan, who was pouring wine with the confidence of a man who believed he'd just pulled off the perfect crime. So, you met with the buyers directly? Multiple times, he said proudly. They were very understanding about the family situation. Not everyone would be willing to work so quickly and discreetly. Discreetly. I'll bet they were discreet. Probably because Metro Property Solutions existed only on paper, and the buyers were friends or relatives of Ethan who'd agreed to help him steal my house. What's their plan for the property? I asked. Are they going to renovate before they flip it? They mentioned some updates, Ethan said vaguely. Modernizing the kitchen, updating the bathrooms. You know how it is with these investment companies? I nodded thoughtfully. And when do I need to be out? Well, technically the sale closed 3 days ago, Sarah said apologetically, but they agreed to give you 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. They're being very generous about it. 2 weeks they were giving me 2 weeks to vacate my own house. The house I'd built myself, where I'd planned to live until I died, where every room held memories of the life I'd built with Margaret and Sarah. That is generous, I agreed, especially considering how much money they're going to make when they resell it. About that, Ethan said, settling into the chair across from me with his wine glass. I think you should know that they're planning to list it for around $2 million. $2 million? But it's worth $5 million. On paper, maybe, Ethan said condescendingly, but this market is unpredictable. Houses like this can sit empty for months without selling. They're taking a big risk buying it sight unseen. $2 million. So even in Ethan's fictional version of events, his buyers were going to make a profit of more than $1 million on the deal, and somehow that seemed reasonable to him. I'm impressed by your business acumen, I told him. You really seem to understand how these investment deals work. Ethan preened under the praise. I've been learning a lot about real estate lately. There are opportunities everywhere if you know how to spot them. Speaking of opportunities, I said, I'm curious about this trust account you mentioned, the one where you're keeping the money from the sale. Sarah and Ethan exchanged a look that lasted just a fraction of a second too long. What about it? Sarah asked. Well, I was thinking that since I'm going to need money for an assisted living facility, maybe I should see the account statements, just to understand how much I have to work with. Dad, you don't need to worry about those details, Sarah said quickly. Ethan is handling all of that. But I'd like to see the statements anyway for my own peace of mind. Another look between them. This time, Ethan's confidence flickered slightly. The account is still being set up, he said. These things take time when you're dealing with larger amounts. How much time? A few more days, maybe a week. A week to set up a bank account. For money that supposedly came from a sale that closed 3 days ago. Even someone with cancer-related brain fog could see the problems with that timeline. Where's the money now? Safe, Ethan said firmly. In a secure holding account until the trust paperwork is finalized. Whose holding account? The silence stretched out uncomfortably. Sarah was looking at her wine glass like it contained the answers to life's mysteries. Ethan was looking at me, like he was trying to decide whether I was really as confused as I was pretending to be. It's complicated, he said finally. There are legal requirements when you're setting up this kind of financial protection for someone in your situation. My situation. Code for old and sick and probably dying soon. I understand, I said gently. It sounds like you've really thought of everything. Relief flooded both their faces. We have, Sarah said earnestly. Dad, I know this is all overwhelming, but Ethan has been amazing through this whole process. I couldn't have handled it without him. I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, trusting, naive daughter, and realized that she genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. In her mind, she was protecting her sick father from financial predators by allowing her husband to steal everything I owned. The manipulation was breathtaking in its completeness. Ethan had convinced her that I was mentally incompetent, financially irresponsible, and incapable of making my own decisions. He'd positioned himself as the responsible adult who was willing to make the hard choices that she couldn't bear to make herself. And she'd believed every word of it because she loved me and wanted to protect me. Sarah, I said softly, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Of course, Dad. Do you really believe I'm not capable of managing my own life anymore? She hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw something that gave me hope. Doubt. The doctors said that cognitive decline is common with your type of cancer treatment, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. What doctors? The ones Ethan talked to. Ethan talked to my doctors. Well, no, not your doctors specifically, but he consulted with some specialists about cancer patients in general. Specialists that Ethan had consulted with about cancer patients in general. Not my doctors, not anyone who had actually examined me or reviewed my medical records, just specialists who had given Ethan general information that he'd then applied to my specific situation. Sarah, have you noticed any signs of cognitive decline in me personally? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. I could see her mentally reviewing our recent conversations, looking for evidence of the mental deterioration that Ethan had convinced her was obvious. You seemed confused when you got home today, she said weakly. I was confused because I came home to find my house had been sold without my knowledge. Wouldn't you be confused in that situation? Yes, I suppose I would be. What else? What other signs have you personally observed? She couldn't answer because there hadn't been any other signs, because I wasn't suffering from cognitive decline and she knew it. But admitting that would mean admitting that her husband had lied to her, had manipulated her into betraying her own father. And that was a truth she wasn't ready to face yet. But I could see the doubt growing in her eyes, and that was enough for now. I left my own house that evening with a small overnight bag and the promise that I'd start looking for assisted living facilities the next morning. Ethan had been generous enough to book me a room at the Holiday Inn for 2 weeks, paid for out of my own stolen money, of course. But instead of wallowing in self-pity, I did something that neither Sarah nor Ethan expected. I fought back. The next morning, I was sitting in the office of Patricia Williams, the best real estate attorney in the county, with my trust documents spread across her mahogany desk. Mr. Miller, she said, after reviewing everything twice, this is one of the most blatant cases of real estate fraud I've seen in 30 years of practice. Patricia was a woman in her 50s with steel grey hair and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. Margaret had always said that if we ever needed a lawyer, Patricia Williams was the person to call. So the sale is invalid. Completely invalid. Your daughter had no legal authority to sell property owned by the Miller Family Trust. Every signature on these documents is meaningless. And the people who bought it? If they exist at all, they've purchased property from someone who didn't own it. That makes them either victims of fraud or participants in it. Patricia pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making notes. I'm going to need you to file a police report. This isn't just civil fraud, it's criminal fraud. Your son-in-law has stolen a $5 million house. The police station was my next stop. Detective Maria Santos listened to my story with the kind of professional attention that told me she'd heard similar tales before. Family fraud is more common than people think, she said, taking my statement. Adult children who think they're entitled to their parents' assets. Spouses who manipulate the situation for their own benefit. We see it all the time. What happens next? First, we verify your story. We'll contact this Metro Property Solutions company and see if they actually exist. We'll examine the sale documents for evidence of forgery. We'll look into your son-in-law's financial situation to see if there's a motive. Detective Santos was thorough. Within 48 hours, she'd uncovered more fraud than even I had suspected. Metro Property Solutions was a shell company that had been incorporated just 6 weeks earlier. The address on file was a P.O. box, and the phone number went to a disconnected voicemail. The buyer listed on the sale documents was Marcus Henderson, Ethan's older brother. But the real revelation came when Detective Santos ran a background check on Ethan himself. Your son-in-law has quite a gambling problem, she told me during our follow-up meeting. He owes approximately $200,000 to various casinos and private lenders. Some of those lenders are not the patient type, if you catch my meaning. $200,000 in gambling debt. Suddenly, Ethan's desperate need to steal my house made perfect sense. There's more, Detective Santos continued. We found evidence that he's been systematically stealing from your daughter's bank accounts for months. Small amounts at first, but increasing over time. She probably hasn't noticed because he's been handling all their finances. My heart sank. Not only had Ethan stolen from me, he'd been stealing from Sarah too. My daughter was as much a victim in this as I was. We also discovered that Mr. Henderson has been forging your signature on various documents for at least 6 months. Credit card applications, loan applications, even a reverse mortgage application for your house. A reverse mortgage? It was rejected because the bank discovered the trust ownership during their title search, but the attempt shows premeditation. He's been planning to steal your assets for quite some time. The picture Detective Santos painted was of a man drowning in debt who had decided that his father-in-law's death from cancer would solve all his problems. When the cancer treatment proved successful and I didn't die on schedule, he decided to accelerate the timeline. What about Sarah? Is she going to be charged? Detective Santos shook her head. Based on the evidence, your daughter appears to be a victim of manipulation rather than a willing participant. Her husband has been gaslighting her about your mental condition while systematically isolating her from other sources of information. That evening, I sat in my hotel room with a folder full of evidence that would destroy Ethan's life and probably end Sarah's marriage. But I still had one more phone call to make. I dialed the number for Metro Property Solutions and wasn't surprised when Marcus Henderson answered on the second ring. Metro Property Solutions, he said, in a voice that sounded exactly like Ethan's. This is Ryan Miller. I understand you recently purchased my house. There was a long pause. I think you have the wrong number. I don't think I do, Marcus. I think you and your brother thought you'd found an easy mark. A sick old man whose daughter could be manipulated into signing away his property. Another pause, longer this time. I don't know what you're talking about. $750,000 for a $5 million house. That's quite a bargain. Almost too good to be true, wouldn't you say? Look, mister, I don't know who you are or what you want, but what I want is very simple, Marcus. I want you to transfer that property back to its rightful owner immediately. I want every penny of the fraudulent sale proceeds returned, and I want you and your brother to disappear from my family's life forever. You're crazy. Maybe. But I'm not stupid, and I'm not as helpless as you two thought. You see, Marcus, your brother made one crucial mistake when he decided to steal from me. What mistake? He assumed that a man with cancer would be too weak to fight back. He assumed that grief and illness would make me easy prey. I could hear Marcus breathing heavily on the other end of the line. But what Ethan didn't realize is that cancer doesn't make you weak. It makes you fearless. When you've stared death in the face for months, a couple of small-time crooks don't seem very intimidating. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you a choice. You can return my property voluntarily and walk away from this with nothing more than wounded pride. Or you can force me to involve the police, the district attorney, the IRS, and whoever else might be interested in your creative business ventures. The line went quiet for almost a minute. How do I know you won't press charges anyway? Marcus asked finally. Because I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in getting my life back and protecting my daughter from a man who's been stealing from both of us. Ethan said you were senile. Ethan says a lot of things. Most of them are lies. Another long pause. What exactly are you proposing? Simple. Tomorrow morning you're going to contact your brother and tell him that the deal is off. You're going to return the property to the Miller Family Trust and disappear. In exchange, I won't have you arrested for fraud, conspiracy, and whatever other charges the district attorney can dream up. And if I refuse, then you'll find out just how serious the state of California is about prosecuting real estate fraud. Spoiler alert, it's very serious. I hung up the phone and poured myself a glass of the whiskey I'd bought on the way back to the hotel. Tomorrow, Ethan was going to get the shock of his life when his brother called to back out of their fraudulent deal. But tonight, for the first time since I'd come home from cancer treatment, I felt like myself again. Not a victim, not a confused old man, not someone to be pitied and managed. I felt like a man who'd built a successful business from nothing, who'd raised a daughter as a single father after his wife died, who'd survived cancer and was ready to survive whatever else life threw at him. Ethan had made the mistake of thinking that stealing from me would be easy. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The phone in my hotel room rang at exactly 7:30 the next morning. I let it ring 4 times before answering, just to let whoever was calling know that I wasn't desperate. Dad? Sarah's voice was shaky and confused. Dad, something's wrong. The people who bought the house are backing out of the deal. They want to return the property and get their money back. That's unfortunate, I said calmly. Did they say why? They said there were problems with the title. Dad, Ethan is furious. He says this kind of thing never happens with legitimate sales. Legitimate sales? I almost laughed out loud. What do you think I should do, sweetheart? I don't know. Ethan says we should sue them for breach of contract, but I'm scared about getting involved in a legal battle. What if there really is something wrong with the sale? There it was. the first crack in her faith in Ethan's version of events. "Sarah, I think maybe it's time we had a serious conversation about this whole situation." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's time you heard the truth." Sarah agreed to meet me at the Riverside Diner, the same place where I'd taken her for pancakes every Sunday morning when she was little. She arrived looking pale and nervous, constantly checking her phone like she was expecting bad news. "Dad, before we talk, I need to tell you something. Ethan doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm at the grocery store." That told me everything I needed to know about her marriage. When a woman has to lie to her husband about having coffee with her own father, something is very wrong. "Sarah, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Everything Ethan has told you about my mental condition, about the necessity of selling the house, about protecting me from myself, all of it is lies." Her face crumpled. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it already is. The doctors said—" "What doctors, Sarah? Give me names. Give me dates. Tell me exactly when and where these medical consultations took place." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Ethan handled all of that. Because there were no doctors, there were no medical consultations. There was just your husband telling you whatever he needed to tell you to get you to sign those papers." I pulled out the folder Detective Santos had given me and placed it on the table between us. "Your husband owes $200,000 in gambling debts. He's been stealing from your bank accounts for months. The people who supposedly bought my house are his relatives, and the sale itself is completely illegal because I never owned that house in the first place." Sarah stared at the folder like it might explode. "What do you mean you never owned the house?" 7 years ago, when you were going through your first divorce, I transferred the deed into a family trust to protect it from creditors and divorce settlements. You were the beneficiary, but I was the trustee. The house legally belonged to the trust, not to me, and certainly not to you." I opened the folder and showed her the trust documents. "Every signature on those sale papers is worthless. Ethan tried to steal a house that you didn't own and couldn't sell." She studied the documents with growing horror. "But the lawyers—" "What lawyers? Did you ever actually meet with any lawyers?" "No. Ethan said he would handle all the legal stuff." "Because there were no lawyers, Sarah. Just your husband and his brother creating fake paperwork to steal $5 million. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "But he said you were getting confused. He said you were forgetting things, making poor decisions." "When? Give me one specific example of me forgetting something important or making a poor decision." She tried to think, really tried, but came up empty. "He said you weren't paying your bills." "I've never missed a bill payment in my life. My accounts are automated." "He said you were wandering around the neighborhood at night." "That never happened, and you know it never happened because you would have been the first person I called if I was having problems like that." The truth was hitting her in waves, each revelation worse than the last. Her husband hadn't just lied to her, he'd systematically manipulated her into betraying her own father. "Sarah, I need you to understand something very important. You're not just an innocent victim in this, you're also being robbed. Ethan has been stealing from your accounts too." I showed her the bank records Detective Santos had obtained. Transfers, withdrawals, forged signatures, a pattern of theft going back 8 months. "He told me we were investing in some business opportunities," she whispered. "He was investing in blackjack tables and poker games." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and went even paler. "He's asking where I am. He says the grocery store called looking for me because I left my credit card there, but I didn't go to any grocery store. He's checking up on you. I need to go home." Sarah, you need to understand that going home means walking into a situation where you're completely under the control of a man who's been lying to you about everything for months. A man who's stolen from you, stolen from me, and manipulated you into committing fraud. I can't just abandon my marriage. Your marriage was abandoned the moment he decided to steal from your family." Her phone buzzed again. This time she didn't look at it. "What do you want me to do, Dad?" "I want you to come with me to the police station. I want you to file a report about the theft from your accounts. I want you to help me make sure Ethan faces consequences for what he's done." "And then what? I lose my husband, my house, everything." "Sarah, you never had a husband. You had a con man who married you to get access to your family's money. And the house you're living in was purchased with stolen funds. Everything you think you have is built on lies." She put her head in her hands and sobbed. Not the quiet tears of disappointment, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone whose entire world has just collapsed. "I'm so stupid. I'm so incredibly stupid." "You're not stupid. You're trusting. You believed someone you loved when he told you lies because you couldn't imagine that someone you loved would lie to you. How did I not see it? Because he's good at this. This isn't his first time manipulating someone. Men like Ethan are professionals at finding vulnerable people and exploiting their emotions. Her phone rang. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. "Answer it," I said. "But put it on speaker. I want to hear what he says when he thinks you're alone." She answered with a shaky voice. "Hi, honey. Where the hell are you?" Ethan's voice was sharp with anger. "I've been calling for 20 minutes. I'm having coffee with my dad. I told you not to talk to him alone. He's confused and he's going to fill your head with crazy ideas." "What kind of crazy ideas?" "Sarah, come home now. We need to discuss this situation with the house buyers backing out. Actually, I think I'd like to hear Dad's perspective on that." There was a long pause. "Your father doesn't understand business. This is exactly the kind of situation I was trying to protect him from." "Protect him from what?" "From making decisions when he's not thinking clearly. Sarah, you need to trust me on this. Come home so we can figure out how to handle this crisis together." Crisis. The word choice was telling. To Ethan, his fraud being exposed was a crisis that needed to be managed, not a crime that needed to be confessed. "Ethan, I have a question for you." "What? When exactly did you talk to doctors about Dad's mental condition?" Another pause, longer this time. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. You said doctors told you that Dad was experiencing cognitive decline. I want to know when and where these conversations took place." "Sarah, why are you asking me these things? Has your father been putting ideas in your head?" "Just answer the question. I don't like your tone. And I don't like being lied to." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched out so long that I thought the call had been disconnected. "Sarah, you need to come home right now. We're going to discuss this in person, not over the phone where your father can coach you." "I'm not being coached. I'm asking simple questions that should have simple answers. You're being manipulated." "By who? The man who raised me and sacrificed everything to give me a good life? Or the man who's been stealing from my bank account for 8 months? I heard Ethan suck in a sharp breath. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the $16,000 you've withdrawn from my accounts without my permission. I'm talking about the forged signatures on loan applications. I'm talking about Metro Property Solutions, which is apparently owned by your brother Marcus." "Sarah, you don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly. I understand that you've been lying to me about everything. If you don't come home right now, there are going to be consequences." The threat was barely veiled. Sarah looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. "What kind of consequences?" she asked. "The kind that happen when wives don't support their husbands during difficult times. Are you threatening me?" "I'm explaining reality to you." That's when I took the phone from Sarah's hand. "Hello, Ethan." "Ryan." His voice went cold. "I should have known you were behind this." "Behind what? Behind exposing your fraud? Behind protecting my daughter from a thief and a liar?" "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the forged documents. I know about your brother's fake company. And I know that you're about to face federal charges for real estate fraud. You can't prove anything. I don't have to prove anything. The FBI will prove it for me when they arrest you tomorrow morning." There was a sharp intake of breath. "The FBI? Real estate fraud across state lines is a federal crime, Ethan, especially when it involves elderly victims and amounts over $500,000. Sarah, please, you have to understand. I was trying to help. Everything I did was to protect your family's assets." But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at her phone with the expression of someone who had finally seen her husband's true face. "Don't come home tonight," she said quietly. "Don't come home ever." She hung up the phone and looked at me with eyes that seemed to have aged 10 years in the past hour. "What happens now, Dad?" "Now we go to the police station. We file reports. We make sure that Ethan faces consequences for what he's done, and then we figure out how to rebuild our lives. Will you forgive me?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "Sarah, you have nothing to be forgiven for. You were protecting someone you thought needed protection. You were being a good daughter to a father you thought was failing. But I betrayed you. You were betrayed by someone who should have protected you. There's a difference." As we left the diner together, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just hope that justice would be served, but hope that my relationship with my daughter could be rebuilt on a foundation of truth instead of lies. Ethan had tried to destroy our family to cover up his own failures, Instead, he'd given us a chance to build something stronger. 6 months later, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee for two. The same kitchen where Ethan had poured my wife's wine and gloated about stealing my life. The same kitchen where I'd pretended to be a confused old man while planning his downfall. But everything was different now. Sarah appeared in the doorway wearing one of Margaret's old robes. She'd been staying in the guest room since her divorce was finalized, and seeing her there in the morning light reminded me of when she was a little girl sneaking downstairs to help me make pancakes on Sunday mornings. "How did you sleep?" I asked, handing her a cup of coffee made exactly the way Margaret used to like it. 2 sugars, splash of cream. "Better than I have in months," she said, settling into the chair that used to be her mother's. "I still can't believe how quiet it is here without him. Without him. We didn't say Ethan's name anymore. It wasn't a rule we'd discussed. It had just naturally evolved that way. He'd become him or that man, or sometimes just silence. "The prosecutor called yesterday," I said, sitting across from her. "The sentencing hearing is next week." Sarah nodded without looking up from her coffee. "How long do you think he'll get?" "Patricia thinks 5 to 7 years. Real estate fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, it adds up." "Good," she said quietly. "I know that probably makes me a terrible person, but good. It makes you someone who believes in consequences for actions. There's nothing terrible about that." The prosecution had been swift and thorough. Marcus Henderson had flipped on his brother immediately, providing evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. The FBI had discovered that Ethan's scheme was even more elaborate than we'd originally thought. He'd been running similar cons on 3 other families across 2 states, but the real revelation had come during the asset forfeiture phase of the case. When the court seized Ethan's accounts, they'd recovered not just the money from my fraudulent sale, but hundreds of thousands of dollars he'd stolen from other victims over the past 5 years. "I got a call from Victim Services yesterday," Sarah said. "They want me to speak at a conference about financial elder abuse. Are you going to do it?" "I think so. If my story can help one other family avoid what we went through, it's worth the embarrassment." She'd surprised me with her strength over the past 6 months. The Sarah who had been manipulated into signing fraudulent papers had been replaced by a woman who understood the difference between trust and gullibility, between love and manipulation. "There's something I want to discuss with you," I said, pulling out a manila folder that had been sitting on the counter. "More legal documents? Different kind of legal documents." I opened the folder and showed her the papers I'd had Patricia Williams prepare. "I'm dissolving the trust and transferring the house directly to you." Sarah's eyes widened. "Dad, no, this is your house. You built it. You've lived here for 23 years. And I want to continue living here, but I want to live here as your guest, not as your landlord." "I don't understand." "Sarah, you're 34 years old. You've been married to a man who controlled every aspect of your finances for 6 years. You need to own something in your own name, something that can't be taken away from you by anyone." She studied the papers with the careful attention she'd learned to pay to legal documents. "But what if something happens to you? What if the cancer comes back? Then you'll make decisions about my care the same way I made decisions about your care when you were a child, with love, wisdom, and your best judgment. But what if I make the wrong decisions? Then you'll learn from them and make better decisions next time. That's how life works." She was quiet for a long time, reading through the transfer documents. "This house is worth $5 million, and you're worth more than that to me." Tears started forming in her eyes. "Dad, I don't deserve this. I signed papers that could have cost you everything. You signed papers that you thought would protect me. You made a mistake based on love and manipulation, not greed or malice. But still, Sarah, do you remember when you were 16 and you crashed my truck into Mrs. Peterson's mailbox?" She smiled through her tears. "You made me pay for the repairs out of my babysitting money. Do you remember what I told you when you finished paying for it? You said that making mistakes was how people learn to make better choices. And did you ever crash into another mailbox? No. Because you learned. You paid the consequences, you accepted responsibility, and you became a better driver. That's all anyone can do." She reached across the table and took my hand. "What if I mess this up too? Then we'll figure it out together. But Sarah, you're not the same person who was fooled by Ethan. You've learned to ask questions, to verify information, to trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right. I should have trusted my instincts about him from the beginning. Your instincts told you something was wrong. That's why you looked uncomfortable every time he explained something to you. But you'd been trained to ignore your instincts in favor of his authority." She nodded slowly. He was very good at making me doubt myself. That's what manipulators do. They make you question your own judgment so you'll rely on theirs instead. Sarah signed the papers with a steady hand. No hesitation, no second guessing. The scared, uncertain woman who had been married to Ethan was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out another set of documents. "I'm also transferring my construction business to you." "Dad, I don't know anything about construction, but you know about business, and you know about people. The construction part can be learned. Are you sure about this?" "Sarah, I'm 67 years old. I've beaten cancer, exposed a con man, and recovered everything he tried to steal from me. I don't need to prove anything else to myself or anyone else. But what will you do? I'm going to teach you how to run Miller Construction. I'm going to travel to places your mother and I always wanted to visit. I'm going to spend time with my daughter without worrying about whether someone is trying to steal from us." She looked around the kitchen where we'd shared so many meals, so many conversations, so many ordinary moments that had seemed unremarkable at the time, but now felt precious. "This feels too good to be true," she said. "It feels like justice to me." That evening we had dinner on the back patio overlooking the garden that Margaret had planted, and I had maintained for 5 years since her death. Sarah had spent the afternoon calling contractors to get quotes for converting the attached garage into a separate apartment. "I want you to have your privacy," she'd explained. "Connected but independent." It was perfect, just like Margaret would have wanted. As the sun set behind the mountains, Sarah raised her wine glass, the same vintage that Ethan had opened 6 months earlier to celebrate what he thought was his victory. "2 new beginnings," she said. "2 new beginnings," I agreed. But as I looked at my daughter, strong and confident and finally free from the man who had tried to destroy both our lives, I realized that this wasn't really a new beginning at all. This was a return to who we'd always been underneath. A father and daughter who loved each other enough to protect each other from anything, including their own mistakes. Ethan had thought he was stealing my house, my money, my relationship with my daughter. Instead, he'd given me back my family. The phone rang inside the house. Sarah started to get up to answer it, but I waved her back down. "Let it ring," I said. "Whatever it is can wait." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in a federal prison, Ethan was probably lying on a narrow bunk, wondering how his perfect plan had gone so wrong. But I wasn't thinking about Ethan anymore. I was thinking about Margaret and how proud she would be of the woman Sarah had become. I was thinking about the future we were going to build together, the business we were going to run, the life we were going to share in the house I'd built with my own hands. I was thinking about second chances and the difference between justice and revenge. Justice was getting my house back, my money back, my dignity back. Justice was watching Ethan face consequences for his crimes. Justice was seeing Sarah free from a marriage that had been slowly destroying her. But this, sitting on my patio with my daughter, planning a future together, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years, this was something better than justice. This was grace.